like you're on vacation.
Yeah, kind of am. Okay, let's open the Littleton Conservation Commission meeting of July 19th, 2022. We'll start out with, I think first, maybe before we get into anything else, say hi to Tim. Amy, do you want to introduce Tim? Tim, do you want to introduce yourself? Sorry, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here.
Oh, that's all right. My name is Tim Peterson. I'm now the newly hired assistant conservation agent for the town of Littleton. I couldn't be happier to be here, and honestly, I wish I lived there. I live down in Southbridge right now, but I'm really just excited to be here and excited to do some good work.
We're really excited to have you.
Yes.
Great.
Great to have you, Tim. Welcome.
Yep. Welcome.
So Tim, as we go through the agenda and things today, certainly don't hesitate to pipe up if you've got questions either about the specific projects, or you've got questions about process, or you've got questions about technical aspects.
Sure.
And certainly afterwards, hopefully get a chance to connect with you and certainly debrief with Amy and things if you've got questions you want to hold until later.
Sounds good.
Okay, Amy, I'll kick it over to you to go through at least the beginning of the administrative discussion.
Okay, so, and actually there is one thing to add at the end of the meeting about 49 Mattawanaki. He couldn't make it until later anyway, so I told him to come in at the end. Did you want to do the minutes of July 5th?
Sure, we can. Any additions, corrections, or deletions to the meeting minutes of July 5th, 2022?
I just got some comments from Kyle.
It was just the date again, I think, really, was the copy and paste. And then like the footer of it wasn't changed. So, and
Right, yep.
And they listed our next meetings, I guess we're probably a couple weeks off. And it didn't have the August. I don't know if we know when we're meeting in August, but it didn't have that. I didn't know.
I wasn't sure, especially whether it was going to be Zoom or not. So now that we know all that, I got it all set.
Any other additions, corrections, or deletions? If not, can we get a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
Make a motion to approve the Conservation Commission meeting minutes from the July 5th, 2022 meeting as amended.
Second. All right, roll call vote. Let's see who we've got. Brian.
Question for you, Amy. Can I vote on the minutes if I watched the recording but was not at the actual meeting?
Yeah, it's just administrative.
Okay.
So you don't even have to have been there.
Okay. Brian Crowley, aye.
Michael.
Michael Livingston, aye, for the same reasons.
Chase.
Chase Burbank, aye.
Carl.
Tom Alberg, aye.
Kyle.
Kyle Maxfield, aye.
Myself, aye. It's unanimous.
All right. So on the, if you want me to keep going, Chase.
Yeah, go for it. Let's see what we can get through here.
Yeah, the 22 woodland deed restriction language I passed around. Basically, just I don't think I necessarily need a vote, but see if there's comments, consensus, anything like that on it. I can pull it up if you want.
I didn't have anything, Amy. I scanned through it briefly before this meeting and it looked good to me.
It's fairly straightforward, and the language itself is out of what we have at the end of the regulations for letting people know they got resource areas on the property. So it seems straightforward. So, and this will be in the deed itself. It will not be a separate deed restriction. It'll be in the deed when he sells the property. So good enough.
As well as the running conditions, right? That when he sells the property, we get to chat with the new owner and so on, right?
Oh, right. Exactly. Yeah. The water departments, actually, Chase, I didn't think you were going to be here. But they're still writing up language for, is it the legislature for something else as well? So they weren't quite ready for tonight anyway. So we agreed to put it off to August 2nd. But I don't know if Chase and maybe Michael, we talked about this, if you wanted to try to set up a time to either sit down with Corey and Ivrea or have a call or something.
I'm certainly
Probably be the
open.
Best thing.
Yeah, certainly open to doing that.
All right. Do you want to try to shoot in person or do it in sort of a Zoom thing?
I'd just assume do it in person if Michael is good with that and the water department is.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do it in person.
So here's the big question. Do you want to do it with or without me? Because I'll be on vacation. I'm leaving Thursday and I won't be back till Tuesday, August 2nd.
Well, I'm not going to be back in Littleton until next Monday, so I think we can free you from that one, Amy.
All right. Well, why don't I see if I set it up for Tuesday the 2nd? And if everything's great, we can talk about it that night. If not, we can kick it off or kick it down the street.
Is there any objection from commission members to me or Michael reaching out to Kathy Stevens with LCT just to understand their perspective on things as well? Not that we necessarily are going to parrot their expectations, but I would be interested to know what LCT thinks, given that they're a player here as well.
And Kathy had also just reached out to me because I think they're meeting with their attorney on Wednesday to see if I could do a call with her, and I'm not gonna have time before I leave. So I kicked that one down the road too. So LCT is certainly interested.
Anybody have any objection to me reaching out to LCD to just chat and understand their perspective?
Good idea.
Go.
All righty. The Hager and Williams Conservation Restriction Review, which I think Michael and Kyle were doing those. If you have any comments, you can get them maybe to me like before the 2nd.
Yeah, I
Comments,
started going
questions?
through yesterday. So
Yeah, it's a lot to wade through. There's really only 3 or 4 pages that are pertinent. The rest of all is either whereases and boilerplate estoppels and notifications and all that stuff. The attorneys have been through both of them. Attorneys on both sides have been through them both. And I think if I remember, the only outstanding issue, if it's not really an issue, on Williams is how to address e-bikes and whether or not to allow them. The Conservation Trust doesn't particularly want to. I kind of tend to agree, but I'd like to get some language in there that in the future, if everyone agrees, we can, and if the trail is appropriate.
So do we currently allow trail bikes?
Yes.
I have no problem with e-bikes. We're allowing them on Fish and Wildlife property that allows bicycles, and we're the most conservative agency. So
Okay.
my 2 cents. It actually opens up the door for people that don't have the ability to necessarily ride pedal distances. So we look at it as it's being more accessible, basically.
It's kind of where I've come around on them too, Carl. I mean, I'd be comfortable with the language in the CR or something that says, I don't know, it's completely unenforceable, but language about e-bikes are allowed if they're necessary for mobility purposes or something like that. But that seems like we're really splitting hairs at that point.
It'd be hard to enforce too, I would think.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Fish and Wildlife Service was allowing them, because I know a lot of open space land trusts, whatever, do not allow them. And I believe the rationale, besides extra wear and tear on the bikes, is people getting out further than maybe they're really capable of doing, which is
I think by not allowing them, it's technology. It's the way things are going. Yeah, it was a tough decision for our agency to swallow, but once the logic came in, it made sense. And I don't think I think the bottom line is you probably won't see a lot of them, would be my guess.
Well, they aren't exactly smooth trails, most of them.
Right.
Yeah, and I have to admit, we do see certainly bike damage from use, but I don't know if we can just pick on e-bikes for that reason.
I mean, and then if you got bike damage, then you can, not allow bikes. I mean, that's perfectly logical too.
Right. We're already seeing damage from bikes. Are e-bikes going to be worse than mountain bikes? Are e-bikes meant for the type of riding that we're seeing cause our damage?
Yeah. Well, right now, the conservation rules and regs don't mention e-bikes at all. LCT, who is going to be the CR holder, their knee-jerk reaction is they didn't like them. So I'll talk with Kathy and actually maybe Chase, if you're talking to her over the Cobb stuff, we can see how they feel about it. So maybe at the least putting in language that if approved by both the grantor and grantee, e-bikes may be allowed.
Yeah, certainly something that would give us the ability to revoke it.
So,
Yes.
I mean, the other thing you could do, Amy, you could allow them just on certain conservation lands that you feel are more appropriate. That's basically what we do. They're not allowed on all refuges, but refuges allow bicycling there. They are allowed on, but you could also limit them on Conscom lands. No reason you can't do that.
And there are some areas I wouldn't mind banning bikes just kind of in general because you're almost always wet. But that's a little bit of a third rail issue too. So, and how the heck do you monitor it? So, all right, I will swing back at least specifically to Williams with the Conservation Trust and see if they thought about it anymore. And then maybe squeeze in one more. 20 Westchester's come in for the request for certificate of compliance. That was a new septic system that they had to really squeeze in between the house and the property lines. There's a wall and a little trench behind the wall. This was like 3 years ago. But everything is in and stable. The trench is there. And I see no runoff going into the next property, which is part of the reason for some of the stuff. So I think it's ready for a certificate, and they are, of course, selling the house.
Any reason that commissioners should do a sidewalk, Amy, or you think it's pretty self-explanatory?
I don't think so. You're just going to see lawn and a small retaining wall.
I'll move that we issue a certificate of compliance for 20 Westchester, Mass DEP file number 2040875.
Second. All right, roll call vote. Carl.
Carl Melberg, aye.
Chase.
Chase Kerr, guy.
Brian.
Brian Crowley, aye.
Kyle.
Kyle Maxfield, aye.
Michael.
Michael Livingston, aye.
Myself, aye. It's unanimous.
Very good. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, let's jump into the 745, and then we can backtrack through the rest of the administrative as time allows. My understanding, so first up is 25 Juniper. It's like, at least on the agenda, we still don't have a Mass DEP file number, but I recall last week, maybe Nick had one. But in any case, I'll turn it over to Nick. I don't think we've seen any updated plans. Do you have anything new to chat about tonight, Nick?
Evening, Nick Pollan from Goldsmith Preston Ringwall. So we do have a file number. It's 204-0964. So we have been looking into the property, doing the historical kind of research to go back in time to create something. Unfortunately, I haven't had the bandwidth or the staff in the office to actually produce something official. We do have some things to talk to the board tonight. Try to go over those. I fully understand that this would be the first time that the board is heard these facts or this new information. So we understand that time for digesting may be needed. More specifically, the applicant, Mr. Rounce, would like to actually say something to the commission, if that would be all right.
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead.
Beth Rounce right now has their hand raised. I don't know if they're muted.
I'm not sure myself. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Rob. So I was going to share some photos, and Rob was going to kind of speak, if that'd be all right with the commission.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. So as you know, I'm Rob Rounce. My wife Beth and I purchased Juniper Road, 25 Juniper Road in October of 2020. I'll tell you that we've listened to each of your meetings since the 22 Woodland filing that you discussed earlier with regard to the deed restriction. During the last meeting, I heard Nick being asked for photos or a narrative to allow the commission to understand how any filing that we would have done would have been viewed, and as best we could present what that situation was at that time before any changes were made. And so tonight I'm hoping to briefly provide that information. Your initial site walk on the 22 Woodland property is the one that identified wetlands. The next two site walks revealed wetland soils that were in a corner of the property. In the photo you're looking at, and Nick, I don't know if you have any pointer or anything, but our house is basically in the center. He's outlining it right now. The 22 Woodland is north of that property, and the wetlands that are being discussed are to the right of that house. You then, you held a total of 3 site walks. I recognize that not all members participated in each of those. Some of you were at least there for a couple of them. And with each site walk, you kept on getting Matt Marrow, if I pronounce it right, to use an auger, and he kept on coming closer and closer to our property line. So that's kind of where we're at right now. The property that consists of the wetlands, if you recall your site walks, I'll tell you, has gone through dramatic changes since you were last there. Knotweed was already very prevalent, and it has expanded greatly and is filling in the area that you previously saw. It's really overgrown, to say the least. I would like to correct one item that Nick unintentionally stated incorrectly. I believe Nick stated at the last meeting that our timeline for our backyard changes was in 2020. That's not correct. We bought it in October of 2020, but we did numerous changes inside the house. We didn't move in until June of 2021. So the changes were actually made last fall, not in 2020, as was said during the last meeting. So I want you to know that we obtained, I think there was some question with regard to compliance and your concerns with regard to people such as ourselves evading compliance with regulations. I'm hoping to give you a couple examples that I view Beth and myself as very much people who attempt to do things properly. We obtained a building permit for all the changes inside the house. And that's kind of where that starts. This photo, I think if Nick can do some pointing, this photo is from 2021. I think it shows the green area, which was a mowed lawn around the perimeter of the house. It shows the deck that existed in the backyard, and it's difficult to see. I recognize you'll see in the subsequent photo that there are garden beds that flank both the left side and the right side of the deck. I think this next photo will show the property a bit better. It was one that, so Nick, if you can move to the next photo. This photo was obtained from Cheryl Cowley, the realtor who sold us the property. It shows an area that I think is of interest to all of us. And you can see that that backyard again contained the deck. You see, I think you can make out that there are cement blocks located to the right of the deck. You then see the garden beds on each side. This photo, it's difficult to see, but Nick, if you can point to where the 21 Jupiter Road property's garage is, that area is the property. The area between the two garages is our version of Japanese knotweed. We estimate that there was approximately 200 to 300 feet of knotweed between the two garages, and then that knotweed proceeds down to the property line that you'll see in another photo. I think I'm ready for the next one, Nick. There was this is a picture from our kitchen door. This is me, partially removing the deck. You see the sonotubes. You see, that's the 22 Woodland house in the background. You can tell from the sonotubes deck, you can see some timbers behind the little flags and the patio furniture, that there's a retaining wall of sorts. That's an original retaining wall before any changes were made. That retaining wall is still there intact. But this does frame where that, what the property looked like as we were just making photos or just making changes. I'd like to point out that this lack of privacy, when we moved in June of 2021, our neighbor that lived in the house before Sean Keenan bought it and did the filing with you, but our neighbor before him, she quickly introduced herself, and this tree that, Nick, if you can identify what I call the dangerous tree. Yeah, this tree existed. There's a limb. This photo doesn't really do it justice. There's a limb up there that actually hangs over that glassy area that you see. And she came out within the first or second day and introduced herself and told us that's your tree, that's your limb, and you should do something about it. She then proceeded to tell us how there's no privacy between our yards, and that's how we met our neighbor. If I could get the next photo. This photo was recently taken, but it reasonably showed, this is actually that knotweed that I was talking about. I think that's quite different than what you folks saw, those of you that did the site walk. It's now so overgrown that it's of great concern to us, quite frankly. But this photo, while I just took it, I never thought that I'd be here back in the fall of last year, so I never took a photo from this view. But this photo represents reasonably what existed. The knotweed wasn't as great then as it is now, but it does show some key components. There was extensive knotweed behind those boulders, and the retaining wall outline our property line with that neighbor at 22 Woodland. Nick, if you could point to what I call the debris pile, the burn pile, that pile was much bigger in the fall of last year. The kind of soil mowed area or weed whacked area that you can kind of make out immediately between the burn pile and our retaining wall. Nick, if you could just, yeah, that area. That area was actually 15 feet from our property line to the burn pile. Back then, it was 15 feet behind the burn pile, and it was 15 feet to the left and right of the burn pile. And so what we saw was Japanese knotweed and this either mowed area or weed whacked area that was done by a neighbor to protect before he burned the pile. This area is now all identified, or there's a little bit to the left of the Japanese knotweed, that maybe there's a slight area that's not wetlands, but essentially by the time of your third site walk, this entire area that you're looking at is all wetlands. Our knotweed, if you were, the photo doesn't show it, but if you were to go to the right extension of the retaining wall, our knotweed would be close to this spot and then proceeded up to our driveway. So it's pretty much an area that extended down the whole line of our property line with our neighbor at 21 Juniper. Again, we had no idea that wetlands existed back here. So confronted with problematic trees and privacy concerns, knotweed, a slope yard, we decided to make changes. First, we hired Scott's Tree and Landscape to remove the dangerous limb that our neighbor at 22 Woodland had told us was, yeah, I know it's not our problem
Michael.
from a verticality standpoint, but she made it our problem. And I didn't think anything about removing or having trees cut down because the realtor that sold us the property, in talking with us about what the former owner of our home had done, impressed upon us that they had taken down a tree and the stump still remained. Now that stump would be on our side of that timber retaining wall that you see, but it was there at the time. So this realtor presented herself. She's been selling real estate in Littleton for decades. She's co-chair currently and has been for some time of the Littleton Zoning Board of Appeals. She sure seemed like she knew what she was talking about. And so her stating that she had taken down a tree on behalf of the owner sure made me feel like taking down a tree in this area wasn't going to be a problem. We knew that we were going to make changes, so I contacted Jim Gareffi from the Board of Health. He came out and walked our property. The area of his interest and my interest in showing him was our leach field that, going back to a prior photo, I'm not asking Nick to jump to it, but the leach field was located on the right side of the house, and then there's a breakout area. And so I hit him out there and talking with him as to what was our situation. It's not his responsibility to identify wetlands. I recognize that, but he did come out. I'm trying to show compliance and attempt to be compliant with regulations. Then I spoke with Ed Mullen a couple times from the building department to make sure that before I did any retaining walls, that I knew what I had to do. I was assured no permit required if it's less than 4 feet, which our retaining wall is less than 4 feet. Then I had 2 different contractors come out to talk about building a patio and removing the sonotubes, removing the cement blocks. And I guess what I want to point out is that none of these people ever, some of them on the property, not by any means looking for wetlands, but none of these people ever suggested or even mentioned the word wetlands to us. No reference was made for, you might want to consider, blah, blah, blah. So I just want to impress upon you how that's the situation. If I could show the next photo, Nick, thank you. So this is our patio. DP Turf and Irrigation Shelter created it. They're the ones that put in the boulders you saw in the previous photo. They're the ones that put in the loam that partially changed the slope from what it was to what it is today. I built a retaining wall that you saw, and it goes up the entire length of the garage. Many of you saw it during your site walk of 22 Woodland. Beth and I don't know how much time we spent, but we hand cut the Japanese knotweed that was on our property, that was on our 21 Juniper property, who he was extremely grateful, giving him back utilization of his space. We dug up the roots. I mean, we worked like dogs cleaning it up. We currently have a few shoots of knotweed, but pretty much we're very happy with where we're looking at some 8-9 months after we cleaned that area up. In fact, we're quite concerned that our NOI and everything that we contemplate, given the knotweed, I know Sean at 22 Woodlands says he's going to do some things, but we're quite concerned about how knotweed through our NOI, if it's executed, is going to bring this knotweed problem right back into our property after we've taken and done the effort to remove it. So I appreciate you listening to me. We're very sorry for disturbing wetlands. We hope it's clear to you that we had no idea that wetlands existed back in our neighbor's property. We have not attempted to evade any of our responsibilities with regard to anything, including wetlands. They don't exist on our property today, and they didn't exist back then. As I've said, we removed between 200 and 300 feet of that we think served the public interest back then, before we even thought about the public interest. We're working with Nick and he in turn with you to do anything with our NOI that will result in us not destroying the patio that you see in front of you. That's our goal. We believe our NOI restores the disturbed area to a condition that's more conducive to wetlands than the mowed lawn that existed throughout that backyard area before we made our changes. We've proposed, or Nick's proposed in the NOI, a recharge chamber to offset the impervious area of the patio that's within the 50 NDA buffer. And we're open to any ideas that you have that won't require destruction of the expensive patio. So I hope the photos that were presented tonight and the comments that I made are responsive to your request made during the last meeting. Obviously, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you've got, and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rob. I want to address one thing just to make it, I guess I want to make it clear. We're not looking at this for in any punitive context. I think it's fairly clear, at least to me, and I think to the commission as a whole, that the encroachment within the wetland buffer zone was inadvertent. And I think you would find that we have a very different approach when we find that the work is willfully disregarded. Nonetheless, I do have to emphasize, though, that I think our biggest concern and what we articulated a couple of weeks ago was that we do not want to create a pathway by which it is better for an applicant to disregard the regs and get caught working outside of the regs than to go through the appropriate process. Now, what we're proposing to do is simply take this project through what the process would be based on what it looked like pre-construction. And so we're very deliberately trying. I understand this may feel punitive in some ways, and I'm just asking you to trust us that it's not a punitive exercise here, but rather a town-wide compliance exercise and trying to be as consistent as possible with the regs. That said, with that preamble, based on the pictures that we saw, Nick, is it possible for you to do some approximate takeoffs off of those to size?
Yeah, so I do have some numbers. I know I haven't presented them in a formal format. I can raffle through them and then follow up with them in writing. But since Rob's statements are fresh in everyone's mind, if we can bear with me. So based on the photos that were available in the assessor's mock-up, what you're looking at in front of you right now, this timber approximates the 12 by 12 patio, or the deck, I'm sorry, the deck that was there previously. You know, pictures kind of augment some dimensions, but this is almost exactly centered where this space here was the concrete steps coming down from the deck previously. So what you had was 12 feet off of the house, and then you had 18 feet extending. The wetlands is delineated approximately by this hose, the 50 foot line approximately. So what the case is, or what we would be coming in if this, you know, as you kind of impressed upon us on the 5th, if we were permitting this today, we would be coming asking for the removal of, a 12 by 18 deck and step area for the replacement of a 24 by 24 patio area with ancillary walls. This was a wall that was timber previously. This is a parapet wall that's relatively new that was within the location of the former garden bed there. So what you'll notice is that, you're about 6 to 12 inches into the 50-foot no disturb with the existing deck, square footages and things like that. What you're looking at is a net increase in impervious area. The outer limit of the patio of the walls produces 627 square feet. If you take the 12 by 18 area, that would produce a net increase of about 419 square feet on the property. That works out to be about a 4.2% increase on impervious area. So it would be under the threshold for the stormwater mitigation within the local regs, but we do have, and we would have proposed as well at that time, this downspout here, as well as this downspout. Those are the two downspouts that we're proposing to tie into the recharge chamber to diminish the surface runoff as it continues overland onto the flow. So you are looking at an increase less than 5 within the 50-foot no disturb or the NDA area. This area here in this photo, you're looking at 195 square feet. It's 197. There's, based on my takeoffs and scabbing in this 12 by 12, it was about a 2 square foot area. So 195, 197 square feet in the NDA. And really where we start coming from presenting or going back in time to present such of that application, the support for the waiver of that 200 square feet, 190 plus square feet would be, I personally feel, in line with the requirements of the performance standards outlined within the waiver section of the local bylaws. Right now, as you can see in the aerial photo, this is or has historically been a property that has been mowed and lawned to its extreme limits of the property. There's one tree, a street tree here, and then these are the trees that were outlined by Rob. So this is a completely disturbed site. There is no buffer. If we came to you before, in this condition to permit the patio, the offset to the wetlands would be 2.5 feet, and that would be directly related to just the property corner to the now known wetland line. The actual wetland buffer in existence would be 0, just from the standpoint of mowing even into the wetlands, as we saw on the 22 Woodland filing. So from a standpoint of, we are proposing to create the restoration area and removing the timber retaining wall. That creates just under 900 square feet of restoration, but it also creates or restores a buffer zone depth of a minimum of 28 feet. If I can switch to the other one, did everyone switch with me there? So this blue line is the wetland lines. This is the 2.5 feet that I was referring to. Again, that's just directly related to the property limit. This hatched area and the sloped area is the restoration, the just under 900 square feet of restoration area. The wetland chamber, and then this is the 28 feet buffer depth here, and some places are greater. So, as far as protecting the resource area, more buffer zone and a longer flow path from anything of this disturbance towards the wetlands through a buffer zone certainly is advantageous. Rob already talked about the invasive removals. Just out of his own personality, he and his wife tackled that invasive removal, and they did a hell of a job. I will actually have some other photos. So this is, I'll jump to the end, but this is actually from the patio looking next door. So just for reference, the left side is the 22 Woodland property. This is the 21 Juniper property. And this is the timber retaining wall that would be coming out with the grade coming down 2.5 to 3 feet to restore the slope. This is this picture the same day that he took this photo with the Japanese knotweed. You know, this used to be a stump that we talked about on the woodland filing. You can't see any longer. And that is creeping over. And now you have actual grass. To kind of continue to beat about that offset and the creation of a buffer zone from the photos that are actually provided in the real estate listing. It's a little bit harder to see, but you can see this is the deck with the stairs, the landscape area, and there was a retaining wall down here. But on the far side, again, this is the same 21 Juniper property. You can actually see that looks more like bare exposed earth rather than even grassed area. That seems to be confirmed on this photo, which is again also from the real estate listing that looked down the right side. This is where the retaining wall is, where you can see the heavy Japanese knotweed and the filling in area that was removed by Rob and his wife when he did this work. So, again, restore buffer, create a buffer, and remove bare soil, invasive removals, as well as the stormwater. So we understand the board's position in the waivers and the regulations, but we feel that this is certainly a net benefit in the public interest of protecting this section of wetland. Any questions?
Comments from the commission here? While folks are collecting their thoughts, Robin and Nick, I do think at a bare minimum, I think we do need you to do what we asked you to do a couple of weeks ago, which is show us a figure of, I understand the photos that you put forward. I think I get a sense of it, but show us a figure of what we're actually looking at. And I would be interested in seeing, you've laid out an argument. I'm not sure I agree with it, but I'd like to see your argument in the waiver, essentially from the context of when this work was done in 2021, here's what we would propose. Here are the, here's how this meets the requirements of the waiver from the perspective of 2021. And I do think that will bring us to a place where we can probably make a decision in a couple of weeks. I'm personally not comfortable until I see it laid out on a figure and understand it a little bit more. And Nick, if you can include some of the data that you've relayed to us verbally, I think that would be helpful as well.
Okay.
Square footages and so on.
Yep. And Rob, the natural reaction when I prepared this application, of course, with, just from the general process of, seeing a wall, the commission issuing an enforcement order due to the new structure, the retaining wall, that's all understandable. So that's the first thing that we propose in our application, to remove that structure and try to regrade it and return it to the natural grade. But, in preparing these photos for Rob's comments, it does, I have to say, it does kind of strike me as, if the goal is to remove invasive materials, an effort to try to protect the wetlands, well, this is a stable site as it is right now with this wall. Granted, it was constructed without a permit, but kind of removing that kind of disturbs the area and reintroduces that kind of natural connection from the invasive stand next door to expand onto here. Just something to kind of keep in mind. I'm not going to revise my application to change the wall. It's just sometimes the obvious answer isn't the best, I guess would be my statement. So I certainly do know that I need to put this in writing so that the commission can digest it and continue to vote on it.
Nick, did GPR do the delineation when you?
No, we actually consulted with Matt Morrow Consulting. That delineation was done first on 20. Well, it's all on 22 Woodland, but yes.
Okay.
So that the delineation is actually part of the order of conditions for the 22 Woodland site.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Anything else from the commission in terms of directing the applicants for 25 Juniper? We're running long, so if you do have anything, let's relay that to them and try and move on to the next item.
Let's got one other question regarding to the wetland. The wetland connects off-site through some type of connection to another wetland.
So there's a wetland. It's adjacent to a drainage structure. It comes across, and catch basins from 19 Woodland come down, discharge into the Ivy Street layout, which is approximately right here. That drainage channel comes down, is very close. I believe it's actually this right here. Comes down, and then that is actually, here's the flow path right here. And that is actually controlled, and I believe actually creates some of this wetland expanding by this drainage control structure here.
Okay.
Corner of, that has to be Juniper and Lake, I think it is. And then that continues down.
Okay. All right. I was trying to get a feel for it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. We're going to move on then to our next item. Thank you very much, folks. We'll put you on the agenda for the second.
So I know that you touched upon when the next meeting is.
Yeah, August 2nd. Does that give you enough time to
I
address-
certainly hope so. I was shooting for tonight. I apologize for giving it to you during the meeting, but yes. So August 2nd, we'll see you then.
And Nick, can you make sure I get copies of all these photos that were used?
Yes. They'll be included in my information. Thank you. Have a great night. See you on the 2nd.
Okay, we're going to move on to an update on the I-495 spill. Michael, there you are.
I'm
here. Right in the middle of my screen here. I'll turn it over to you to give us a quick update on where we stand. I know you sent some data over today, but any update that you can provide would be appreciated.
Sure. Thank you for having me. The data, the numbers that came back were below reportable conditions. So it appears that the remediation and all the efforts that were associated with the emergency response got the levels of contaminants down to a point where they don't really present a potential risk to public health or the environment. In this case, we're very much concerned about the environment as well as the public. So it is our intent to move forward with doing a risk assessment and determining that there is a permanent solution related to the remediation and the emergency response that was done as it relates to the site.
Could you talk about the disposition of the fill material that was put in to facilitate the remediation and what the plan is for that?
Yes. We've had numerous conversations with Mass DOT, and we've been looking at this ourselves. And I know that the commission has a concern about the riprap and it being on the slope. But at this point in time, we're more concerned about the possibility that there would be a slope failure and that material would get into the wetland. And so our position at this point in time is that it would remain there.
And where is Mass DEP on that particular element of the remediation?
The DEP is not necessarily involved in that part, but the DOT is. And we didn't discuss this last meeting, but I thought we would bring it up this meeting. And it's a question of jurisdiction. And really, because this property is managed and controlled by the Mass DOT, basically, they they don't have a responsibility to meet the intent of the Wetlands Protection Act in a way that someone else would have to meet it. So their position is that they're more interested in making sure that that slope doesn't fail and that there's a way in which there can be runoff into that area, which is what's been going on for some time now. So I don't see any wiggle room on their side in terms of us making an argument to remove the riprap. I know it's something that the your Conscom, is very, concerned about, but we still believe also from an environmental standpoint that maintaining the stability of that slope so that there's no failure, so that more material doesn't move from the slope into the wetland is more beneficial than actually removing the riprap. So at this point in time, our client is more inclined to not do anything. Whether or not that position could be changed in the near or far future, I don't know, but I would say probably not.
Just to be clear, you are aware that there are ways to stabilize a slope that don't involve riprap, right?
Yes. But those would involve plantings, and those would I mean, they're not going to have the same.
Yes.
That's what was
But they're not
there,
going to have the
right?
same effect.
I'm really struggling with this.
Yeah, I agree.
So Mass DOT, did you say that they claim that they're above the law? Is that what you just said? I think you said that they're not, that they don't have to abide by the wetland regs. That doesn't make sense to me. Everybody has to abide by the wetland regs, even the railroad, who you would think, has been there longer than the roads. They abide by the wetland regs. I'm trying to understand that statement.
I understand your position and I understand your concern, but the jurisdiction that the Mass DOT has over that property does provide some level of exclusion in the context of the Wetlands Protection Act.
But to be clear here, Mass DOT is not your client, correct?
No, they are not. Our client is Ferrara Towing.
And does Ferrara Towing have relief from the Wetlands Protection Act?
They do not.
I remain confused.
Well, I can explain it to you that Ferrara's position is that they're doing this work in an effort to do what they believe is the right thing as a result of an accident. And it was an accident that they could not have prepared for, but they're just trying to do the right thing by being cooperative, by making the Conscom aware of the efforts that they took in order to clean up this spill, the efforts that they made in order to make sure that the spill was mitigated, and in order to make sure that they would be able to show that the spill, as a result of the levels of contamination that don't exist as a result of the sampling that we've done, that the wetlands is no longer at risk, and whatever risk does exist is acceptable under the Massachusetts contingency plan.
So then there has to be there's a cleanup element too, beyond like anything that you put in to stop that from spreading can't stay. It's like an oil spill in the ocean. They put down mitigation bags and stuff to collect the oil and stop it from moving, but those are all removed following the incident.
Well, those were removed because
I'm just using it as an example, but.
Well, I don't think our client is trying to avoid doing any further work as it relates to whether it be the Wetlands Protection Act or just their responsibility to do what the right thing is. What I'm simply saying is that they believe that the work they've done so far is sufficient, and they don't believe that it's necessary to remove the riprap in order for that work to be completed. May I finish, please? Removing the riprap is not going to in any way further protect the wetlands. It could be just the opposite. As you realize, this wetland is associated with 495, and there's water during rainstorms and other events that are flowing into the wetland. And this riprap is actually impeding some of that flow and could further prevent there being a situation into a large slope failure would create a turbidity issue that would far more be harmful to this wetland than simply letting it remain there.
My sense here is that we need to interface directly with Mass DOT. I appreciate, Michael, that you're representing their perspective here. I'm not comfortable with your resolution of this, and nor am I particularly comfortable with you representing Mass DOT's perspective, given that they're not your client here. What I would like to do is understand who your point of contact is there at Mass DOT, because I think we would like to make sure they understand that we have substantial concerns with leaving riprap in place. And furthermore, I think we would challenge you to explain how leaving riprap in place provides equivalent wetland habitat for the various salamanders and so on that might live in that area. So I understand there are trade-offs. I think we all very much understand that stabilizing it with a more naturalized stabilization is more expensive. But I don't think we accept that it is necessarily inferior. It's just more challenging to do correctly. And by more challenging, I mean more expensive. But I think it's our perspective that it's incumbent upon your client to address that. So nonetheless, I think the resolution here is to understand Mass DOT's perspective as well. And like to kick that down the road for a couple of weeks.
Hey, Chase, it's my understanding when an incident like this happens, DEP comes in and they kind of run it. They take the lead as opposed to the local jurisdiction, which would be us. Where do they stand? Do we know where DEP stands at this point?
The DEP isn't, I apologize, the DEP is involved. A release notification has been submitted. The DEP has put together a notice of responsibility, but it is not specific to the protection of the wetlands in the context of the Wetlands Protection Act and the jurisdiction and your concerns, legitimate as they are. It's more concerned, let me finish, please. It's more concerned with the levels of contamination and what the reportable conditions are associated with that and whether or not those conditions have been mitigated. So the DEP has not asked our client, not DOT, Ferrara Towing and Recovery, has not asked us to do the wetlands mitigation work. It has asked us to show that the work that has been done to mitigate the release has lessened the amount of contaminants that exist presently in the sediment and the water that are below the conditions that are required by the MCP. And the instrument in order to do that is to do what's called a permanent solution. Well, there's other instruments, excuse me, but our goal is to, so I understand your frustration, and believe me, I can talk to my client and I can talk to the DOT, and my client is prepared to have us meet with you as often as possible. But I agree with the committee in this context. I think we need to have someone from the DOT and I can come as the representative to my client, or I can have someone from my client meet with the Conscom. But right now, the responsibility that my client has is to meet the requirements of the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, which do not involve the Wetlands Protection Act. And right now, the data shows that the result of the cleanup will meet that requirement. So if we need to involve Mass DOT, we need to involve our client further. I can assure you that my client would be prepared to do that. And I can also talk to Mass DOT and we can see what the best course of action is. I don't think, and I could be wrong, I'm not convinced that we can't come to something that would make everybody feel comfortable. Because the reason why we've been meeting with you and talking to Amy and all of you is that our client, I can't speak for the Mass DOT, I can't speak for, the DEP, but our client wants to do what's right. So allow me the opportunity to speak with my client, to speak with the Mass DOT, and see if there's a way that we can all come together at the next meeting or the next meeting in which you guys are prepared and have this discussion further.
I'd like to also include whoever the representative is from DEP that you're working with. I think they need to be there also.
I can ask Phil Olson to be there. I think he would be more than willing to do so. He's the DEP representative.
Michael, you mentioned the data. Can I just go a little bit of a different direction? But so I tried to look over the data, and you just told me that there was no levels of concern there. The first one you have shows the 495 pond hydrocarbons levels above a reportable concentration, doesn't it? Am I reading the table wrong?
Not for GW2. No, there's no reportable.
No, that's fine. GW2, you have the limit as 5,000. The 495 pond is listed at 9,400. It's almost 2 times the limit.
I don't have that on my table, but I can look to see if that's the case.
And there's a similar issue, Kyle, with the aliphatics and the sediment.
Yeah, honestly, I hadn't even gotten. Well, yeah, that's what I was looking at. The alphabet.
You and I are going down the same path. I was going to push on this as well. I staunchly disagree.
Hold on, gentlemen, hold on, please. There are no MCP values, reportable conditions for sediment. So we can't hold our client to contaminant levels in sediment, but there are no reportable conditions that exist within the DEP system for contaminants.
And soils are typically used as surrogates for sediment samples.
I have a question.
No, that's not true. Please don't do that. Please, that's where I have to disagree with you. I understand your concern, but you can't do that. You can't have it both ways. You can't say you have regulations, we have to abide by them, and then manipulate the regulations so you can say, typically, the sediments are considered the same as soil. They are not. They're nowhere near the same, and they are not the same in the context of the Massachusetts contingency plan. My client has no requirement, none, zero, to be compliant with any levels of contaminants in sediment because they do not exist. Now, if you're talking about a moral responsibility or an ethical responsibility, it can be discussed, but it's not relevant. So we're not going to go down that path.
It's not at all the typical standards applied by Mass DEP. It just isn't.
Okay.
Clean up sediment sites throughout the state.
Disagree.
I just why do you just don't present it? I'm questioning why you present it that way, because it's clear, like you're saying, you're showing me that there's an issue without telling me that you're telling me that there isn't an issue. Anybody, if somebody has no background and they look at this and they see a number greater than a number in the reportable concentration column, regardless of the semantics on how you want to say it.
Numbers, it's very typical to take
this is your table. Bolded values exceed the method 1 cleanup standards. Sediment sample said W01 has a bolded value. You're telling me right here that you exceed the cleanup standard.
There are no cleanup standards for sediment. We're simply using the soil standards as a way of showing how you can take these numbers and compare them to standards that exist, even though they don't apply.
I'm not sure this is a productive conversation anymore. I do think the next step here is to have a related conversation, as we've discussed, with Mass DOT and Mass DEP to understand their perspective on this cleanup.
I agree. And I can arrange that if you want. And I'll coordinate it with Amy.
What is the pleasure of the board here to try and do something? Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah. So if I can say it's obviously an incredibly difficult site, but I don't know if anybody wants to try to do a site walk out there. And it's right on the shoulder of 495. There is a place to pull off, but it's tough.
I would love to see this riprap slope and how it potentially ties into the on-ramp and or off or whatnot. Yeah.
I think that would be very helpful. I agree. Let me know when and I can arrange for it. We'll still go this other
Are you going to
path.
arrange transportation, Michael, or what?
I can arrange for transportation if necessary. My client will do that. How many board members would want to come? I mean, give me a week or so to arrange for it, obviously. But yes, the answer is yes. I think it would be very helpful for everyone for us to go to the site and have an opportunity like we did with you, Amy, to look at the site and talk about the concerns and see what pathway is best for everyone, mostly the wetland.
Would you plan on having the other two agencies at this site meeting? Is this where the site discussion would take place?
I will do what I can, but as you know,
I'm just asking, is that going to be the forum for that, or?
I think it would be a very good forum, but as you know, trying to get people from state agencies to cooperate in this way sometimes can be difficult, but I'm quite sure if you give me enough time, I can get someone from the DOT and someone from the DEP to be there. I know Phil Olson, who's the DEP person that's associated with the site, would be very cooperative. I need to talk further with the DOT. So that's why I'm asking for a couple weeks, especially this time of year when people are taking vacations.
Okay, why don't we plan on then having, you could plan on sending, Amy, you're out. Make sure, Michael, that you send an email to Amy and Tim. Tim Pearson is our new assistant conservation agent. Send an email to them no later than a week from today with, at a minimum, a status update in terms of what you've done to try and arrange this. We understand schedules can be difficult, but I would like an update within a week. And ideally in that updates, that's no more than a week from now, some dates and times for how we would go about actually doing this. I think we could probably contort ourselves around what we needed to in terms of schedule if Mass DEP was going to be available to do the sidewalk concurrently with us.
Yeah, I'm guessing the usual time of 5 is probably a really bad time to be out there.
I would expect it's probably a bad time.
What did you say? I didn't hear you, Amy. I'm sorry.
The commission often does their site walks around 5:15, which sounds like a bad time to be on 495.
Yeah, and I don't know if I could get someone from state agencies. I think it would have to be late afternoon. Is that a possibility or
Noon.
what? Excuse me?
Or a noonish, because
Noon
sometimes
would be great. Everybody's available noon, but late afternoon or I'm just saying that, you know, people that work for these agencies, sometimes their day ends earlier than for what the most of us would. I'm trying to be politically correct, but you know what I mean.
Oh, sure.
They start very early, right? That's what you mean.
Yes, we can commit, we can commit to make a time when everybody can be there, but it would most likely be around noon or 1 or 2 o'clock would be my guess that the parties that we all want to be there would be available, those from the state. And we can make arrangements for, you know, transportation.
Is that okay with everybody? We'll try and accommodate whatever Mass DEP needs there in terms of being there concurrently with them.
Sounds good.
Good.
Yep, sounds good.
So Michael, we'll look for an update from you a week from now, and then
Yes.
we'll have you in the week after that. Hopefully between those two times, we'll have had a chance to take a look at.
Thank you.
at the
Yes.
site.
Thank you for your time. Yes.
Very good. Any other comments or questions from the commission before we move on? We've got a bunch of folks waiting. We're already half an hour behind you. Okay. Very good. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Next up on the agenda is the Littleton High School Environmental Club, here to, my understanding is, discuss single-use plastic bags. Who should I turn it over to here, Amy? Elizabeth?
Yes, Elizabeth Berry, looks like.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? So I'm
Yep.
the advisor to the Littleton Environmental Club, and they've been working on drafting legislation. They had originally hoped to present it at the May town meeting, but they had presented to the select board, and the select board recommended that they wait until the special town meeting and make some revisions to the legislation draft that they have so far. And he recommended that we solicit advice, input from the Sustainability Committee and from the Conservation Committee. So we're really here just kind of seeking input and advice in terms of how to make this happen. So we're going to go through, I have Arv here, Tyler and Katie. We were just kind of going to go through section by section, and you could just sort of stop us if you have questions or, advice on wording or, just, things that we might change to improve, this current draft. All right, so Arv, do you want to begin maybe with the first section? Outline
Okay,
purpose?
yeah, well, so for our purpose, we have the purpose of this bylaw is to regulate the retail use of single-use plastic checkout bags and promote the use of reusable, recyclable, and biodegradable bags in the town of Littleton. This regulation of single-use plastic bags has positive impacts on the local and global environment, including but not limited to reducing solid waste, minimizing litter, reducing the carbon footprint of the town of Littleton, protecting local waterways, avoiding the waste of finite natural resources, protecting the marine environment, and preserving the unique natural beauty of the town of Littleton. In addition, we would like to note that we'd be joining 147 towns, which was back from earlier this year, across Massachusetts that have already adopted restrictions on the use of plastic bags.
So section 2 is going to be the definitions. 1, single-use plastic bags refers to plastic bags, including but not limited to a bag with integral handles made of non-biodegradable plastic that is less than 3 mils in thickness and is intended for single-use transport of purchased items provided by an establishment to a customer at the point of sale. 2, recyclable paper bag refers to a paper bag that is 100% recyclable and displays in a visible manner on the outside of the bag the word recyclable or a symbol identifying the bag is recyclable. 3, reusable checkout bag refers to a bag with handles that is specifically designed for multiple use, preferably made of natural fibers that at least 3 mils or thicker. 4, establishment refers to any business or vendor that sells or provides food, merchandise, goods, or personal services to the public. Note that the term establishment does not include bazaars or festivals operated by nonprofit organizations or religious institutions.
Katie, do you want to go ahead and read section 3? You unmute maybe in the left-hand corner. Oh, maybe the microphone's not working. It's okay. Arb, do you want to go ahead and go through the regulation section?
Got it. So section 3 regulations, single-use plastic bags should not be distributed, used, or sold for checkout or other purposes at any establishment within the town of Littleton, with the following exception. Single-use plastic bags used to contain dry cleaning, newspapers, produced meat, bulk foods, wet items, perishables, and other similar merchandise, typically without handles, are still permissible. If a retail store provides or sells checkout bags to customers, the bags must be one of the following: recyclable paper bag as defined above, or reusable checkout bag as defined above. And the Littleton Board of Health may adopt and amend rules and regulations that effectuate the purposes of this bylaw.
The select board had also told us that they immediately, as soon as it was included in the town warrant, that they had some feedback or concern from a citizen about using paper bags and just the energy consumption involved with that. So we had kind of changed some of this to, make sure that it's clear that the purpose is to get people to use reusable bags and not just to, replace the plastic bags with paper bags. Tyler, do you want to go ahead for section 4 and talk about the enforcement and penalties?
Yeah, sure. So section 4, the enforcement of this bylaw shall be the responsibility of the Board of Health in Littleton, Massachusetts. The Board of Health shall determine the monitoring and enforcement process to be followed and incorporate these processes into town duties as appropriate. This bylaw may be enforced by any lawful means in law or equity, including but not limited to a non-criminal disposition as provided by the MGL Chapter 40, 21D, an appropriate chapter of the general bylaws of the town of Littleton. The following penalties shall apply. The first offense, a written warning. Second offense, a $50 penalty. And the third and subsequent offense is a $100 penalty.
For section 5, we have the severability. Each section of this bylaw shall be construed as separate to the end of that if any section, sentence, clause, or phrase thereof shall be invalid for any reason. The remainder of this bylaw shall continue in force. And for section 6, the effective date, we didn't really set one, but we were thinking of either, if we're going for the special town meeting, either January 1st, 2023, or possibly 6 months after it's passed. So now we would just like take any of your feedback or opinions on our legislation draft.
I have a few questions. This is Kyle. I guess I'll start. I can see the enforcement penalties page. So are those the penalties that you have there listed? Have you take these from the 147 other towns, or where did you come up with this list?
Yeah, so most of our penalties, we looked at the bylaws of other local towns, such as Harvard, Sudbury, other towns around the area. And so it was normally written 2550 or written 50-100. We went with 50-100, but if you guys think 2550 is also an option as well.
I was just curious. Thank you. So the second question I have, I know this has been heavily discussed in town in the past already and has been presented to the town. Are you aware, and have you maybe reviewed the past town meetings for the back and forth that was on display for those conversations? I think it might be worthwhile maybe so you know what you're up against with the people, like she mentioned with the paper bags and how much energy might be used to produce those. I just want to make sure you're getting a good, not coming into this blind and are aware that it has been discussed in town for a great deal.
That was brought up to us. I think that the select board, they were trying to protect us in some ways from that in the regular town meeting, and advised us to think a little bit more about how to respond to those arguments. We met with Kim Cutter, who had presented this proposal. I think it was back in 2019, I believe. And she shared her materials with us, and even shared the gentleman who I think, was sort of giving the most pushback, his name, and suggested that we reach out to him as well to see if he had any suggestions in terms of how to put this in place, but really to encourage, the use of reusable bags rather than just kind of, like I said, replace plastic bags with paper bags. So I think we're planning to reach out to him. But is there anything you can sort of, tell us about what that back and forth was like, or if there's any strategy that we can use to kind of counter that would be effective? We'd also talked about microplastics, not just the energy consumption, but also thinking about the way, plastic bags end up, putting microplastics in our water sources and soil and whatnot.
I don't know if I have advice. Go ahead, Carl.
No, good. What I was going to say is one outspoken person shouldn't rule this question that you're raising. It's not how town meetings operate. So if it's more than one person, I don't know. I have not heard the discussion. But if 147 other communities in Massachusetts have passed this, to me, it says there's something right about this or good about this. And I think maybe you go to those towns that have done this, I'm sure they had the similar pushback, and see how they reacted to that type of an argument. However they got it passed, that would be one route I would take. And also, I think in your opening, in your purpose, you mentioned marine environment. Unless Littleton's moved closer to the coast, you may want to take that out.
Definitely, thank you.
I would certainly advocate that you guys take a look at the life cycle assessments of plastic bags versus paper bags versus reusable bags, and be able to speak to the much higher carbon footprint and energy footprint associated with all of the things that would replace plastic bags. Fundamentally, I think this is a flawed approach. I think as someone who will probably challenge you at town meeting on this, it fails almost every life cycle assessment here. The ideal scenario, and so I want to broadcast my criticisms for you, and then hopefully you guys can do the research and prove to me that I'm all wet, and I would very much like you to do that. But given the low weight of plastic bags, they have a much lower transportation cost and transportation energy footprint than all of the other uses, and the reusable bags sounds good on paper, but I think you should look into the uptake rate of reusable bags versus simply replacement with paper bags. And honestly, if you can convince me that ultimately this does a meaningful amount of good as opposed to being neutral and introducing additional regulatory burden for no functional value, I'm all ears. But when I looked into it pretty intensely in 2019, the life cycle assessments really came down on the side of, paradoxically, plastic bags.
And we did some research, and we, looked at paper bags and ultimately found the same, the same thing, that their life cycle, that it was actually, less energy efficient. We looked at different types of reusable bags, and there seemed to be significant differences between the types of reusable bags. And I guess we're wondering too, how specific, we can be, because, if we can get bags that are not made, really just not made of plastic, can be reused over and over and over again. Again, it's really depending on the number of times that the bag can be used that seem to make the difference. Obviously, we think fiber bags, that kind of thing, it does take a lot of resource, a lot of energy to create those, but if they're used a number of times, eventually they will sort of, carry their value. Any thoughts about, that kind of a, that kind of specificity in the proposal itself?
My recommendation there would be that if you're going to go down that path and really make that comparison, your argument would be significantly weakened by only looking at the ideal scenario, right? We know that some people are simply going to replace plastic bags with paper bags. We know some people are going to replace plastic bags with cloth bags that are going to last for the next 20 years. So making some reasonable assumptions that I think people at town meeting can get their head around. And one of the things that often happens at town meeting is one minor crack in your argument gets exposed, and all people do is needle you for that. And so being reasonable with your assumptions and your comparison is going to be a really important way for you to sort of offset that and counterbalance that. People will say, oh, yeah, we agree cloth is great, but, what about the people that take up paper bags? And you say, well, if, 40% of people take up paper bags and 60% take up reusable, here's how it comes out, and it's a net benefit. Or it's not, and I think you should be straightforward with that too.
That's great. Thank you very much. Is there any other feedback that you think we could benefit from?
Having sat through the 2019 town meeting, I think you should also be prepared to respond to questions and concerns about reusable bags getting dirty, carrying bacteria. That seemed to be something that people were worried about. And having a response or rebuttal to that would be beneficial.
Or wouldn't that be up to the person that is using the bag to make sure that it's kept clean? And not to the argument, just use a new plastic bag every time?
Sure, but now you also have to account for the life cycle analysis of washing a cloth bag.
Yeah.
But you're right. But contrast that with people know that they're always going to get a clean plastic bag. And that seemed to be a concern that some people had. Believe me, I'm trying to tell you what I heard in 2019, not.
No, this is
Necessary.
good. It's good you're doing that, Chase.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And I think, if anything else comes up, if there's any other recommendation that comes to you later on, feel free to reach out to us. So we'll, continue to do our research and put some numbers together. I think asking around, the nearby towns too is going to be helpful, even in terms of getting a sense of, looking into, how many people are using what kind of bag and how often those, fiber bags do get reused. So we can kind of put together some statistical information. All right. Well, thank you again. Appreciate it.
I personally think it's great you guys are doing this. It's a good learning experience.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you all for coming. Okay, we're moving on now to notice of intent for 11 Lincoln Drive, Mass DEP file number 2040965. Someone here to speak to that?
Yeah. Hi, Scott Harris, 11 Lincoln Drive.
Hey, Scott, how you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good. So the way we typically do this is we ask the applicant to give us a brief. I'm going to ask you to try and keep it to about 5 minutes. What are you proposing? And then we'll probably ask you some questions trying to understand that, and then sort of see where it goes based on the project that you described.
Sure.
I know there was a filing with a figure. It looks like you're on your phone. Are you able to share that? Or can we ask Amy to share it maybe?
I can put it up.
Okay, go ahead. So Scott, you want to give us a 5-minute rundown of what you're proposing here?
Sure. So back in 2015, we had considerable work done in our yard, including regrading. We put in a fence, put in a shed, all which encroached on the 100-foot buffer of the wetlands, all of which we had signed off by the Conservation Commission at the time. And all we're looking to do now is, in the area that we already had regraded, is to put in a relatively small above ground pool. So we haven't actually talked to I've talked to contractors, but they haven't actually come out to do the site assessment, but we're planning on a 12 by 24 above ground pool. And if you can see that in that picture, I drew there's the existing fence in green. So it would be basically just inside the fence, between the fence and the leach field. So we'd be squeezing it in there. And that's basically it.
Okay. Let's see what commission members, what questions folks have here. Anybody want to lead off with questions for Scott?
Is the ground flat where you're proposing this pool currently, or is there a slope? I can't really tell from the previous plan.
So this drawing is actually prior to when we had it leveled. So it's relatively level. There is a slight gradation still for water runoff, but so there would be some additional leveling that would have to be done, but it would be very minimal.
So you said the work that you did previous was within the 100. Where is this in regard to that?
So I don't know if you can see it on that drawing. It kind of goes right up through the left side of the where the pool is. So most of the pool would be inside the 100 foot buffer, but it's right on the edge.
So it's at the edge of the 100. So
right.
You're somewhere between you're closer to the 100 than you are to the 50.
Yeah, we're well outside the 50.
Can you tell me how is the pool secured to the ground? I don't know anything about above ground pool construction. I mean, are there stakes driven into the ground around the pool, or can you just kind of talk me through that?
So from my understanding, there's nothing that's staking it directly to the ground. It's basically the weight of the water inside the pool is holding it in place. But I'm definitely not an expert on that, and we're having someone put it in for us, so they'll obviously do whatever needs to be done.
I see this as over top of it. Looks like maybe your septic reserve area. Is that
so? On the left,
help me understand that.
So the septic is to the back of the property, basically toward on the top of the drawing, kind of, and the leach field is all to the left of this. So this is all to the right of the leach field. I checked with the health department. They said that should be fine as long as it's not on top of it. So there shouldn't be an issue with septic.
But is it over top of your current reserve area? Most septic systems have a primary discharge location and then what's called a reserve area where you would put another septic system.
Gotcha. Yes, it is. You're right. Yes, I believe that is the case.
This is the reserve area, and I confirmed with Jim Gareffi that as long as they are going up, not down, they are okay with it. So if they need to use a reserve, the grade would still be there, if you will. They obviously have to get rid of the pool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the requirements that I would absolutely need to see in a findings or order of conditions is that if the reserve area needs to be utilized, the existence of the pool is not a consideration. And if the applicant needs to remove the pool to put septic system in, that's unfortunate. But what we would not accept is further moving the septic system closer to the wetland line because of reluctance to remove the pool. In other words, you're not allowed to create your own hazard that you have to work with.
Right.
Where would you drain the water to if the pool had to be emptied?
So I guess that would be towards the wetlands.
Do you empty the pool every year or you just cover it in the winter?
So this would just be covered every year. Hopefully we wouldn't have to empty it unless obviously there's an issue, but it should remain filled.
And in the event of like a catastrophic pool failure, I'm not saying that, anything crazy is going to happen, but would there be anything in place, any, I don't know, some kind of berm or something to contain the water from rushing down the hill and directly into the wetlands all at once?
There wouldn't be, no.
I think the chances of that, Andrew, are fairly low, but it's a good question.
Another question here for you, Scott. When we permit things like this, we very much want to see the totality of the project. Are you anticipating decking around this? Are you anticipating a patio around it? Or is this truly just going to be a freestanding 12 by 24 above ground pool with a ladder into it?
So the one that we are looking to purchase has a built-in 2-foot decking around 3 of the sides, and then an additional 5.5-foot decking on the third side. Maybe down the line we'd want to add an additional deck, but that would not be an immediate thing.
Does that encompass the 12 by 24, or is that off of
that? That's additional.
So we should probably have you revise this or annotate it in some way so it's clear that that was part of the original filing.
Okay.
what we don't want to do is get into a position of wondering if this is approved down the road. Did it include this deck? Did it not, et cetera?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we like I said, I haven't actually had the contractor come out yet, so we haven't necessarily finalized that. But I think that is the plan.
Can we go back to the beginning? I'm still struggling with the slope. So my understanding is that the plan that you overlaid this on was the septic plan. Does this represent the condition of the property right now, or has something changed relative to this contouring that we see in this plan?
Right. So this was the as-built when we moved in. We have done some additional work that is not included on here, which includes mostly leveling that area up to the fence.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chase. I know where you're headed.
Why does it always have to be me? I don't
you laugh first, dude.
So work within the 100-foot buffer zone, including filling, is something that should have a permit associated with it. My 2 cents here is that we should address that simultaneously with this. Can you give us a sense, even just a drawing on this, to identify the extent of the filling that's been done out here?
And
how far back it goes, et cetera?
I believe there was a permit for this. There was like
there was.
a wall down
yeah.
by the road, right? And
Right. Yeah, all that was permitted at the time, yes.
But we don't have an as-built from that.
No, there's no as-built,
okay.
but it was permitted.
Okay.
Thank goodness.
Yeah,
Okay.
that makes me feel better after you went through a permitting process for the septic and then you didn't for the
Yeah.
Misunderstood. Okay, got it. So it is relatively level. The slopes that we see here don't exist, but the reason it's level has been addressed and permitted. Got it.
Correct.
Okay.
And perhaps getting it staked out when you have a better idea of where the decking is, and a quick site walk might be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the way I'm understanding this, Scott, is you took this plan and you said, right about here looks good. You know, I think is there an opportunity that this could move further to the left on this plan? You know, get out there and stake stuff out, or is it?
So we're hoping to put it basically as close to the fence as we can, but
go the other way.
But we're but it's gonna, you know, I got to see what the contractor says that what's possible in terms of it has to be 30 feet from the front of the property, so it's about that where I drew it. So I don't anticipate it really moving much unless the contractor says that it can't be put there.
Does it question for the commission, does it make sense to sort of take a straw poll right now? Are we generally okay with this going forward? If we are, then we give Scott that information. He can now, with a certain degree of confidence, go interface with his contractor, work out the specifics, and then come back with a revised plan that addresses the specific considerations.
Yeah. I support this, Chase. That'd be my
And I agree with what you said, Chase. I think that makes sense too. No sense. I mean, it's amazing that he already has a DEP number, honestly, a file number from everything we've seen in the past. But,
Actually, this mistakenly got filed with DEP before it was filed here. So they had a head start.
Well, still good for them.
So Scott, what we want to try and do is avoid a revision loop where we say, okay, we're good with this. And then you work with your contractor and you're like, oh, it needs to be a slightly different location. But what we, I think, could give you is a certain degree of confidence that we're generally comfortable with this or not, or not. I don't mean to speak for the commission. Via a straw poll, then you can go work out the specific details. Once you get those sorted out, you can come back to us with, hey, we made these tweaks. This is the plan we talked about, plus these changes, and then we could probably go forward at that point. Is that something that could work for you?
Yeah, that sounds fair.
And I assume at least you'd also want erosion controls shown and any stockpiles.
Yeah, that's a good point, Scott. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but we do want to make sure that any disruption that's being done here, we have erosion control so sediment doesn't run into the wetland. Should be a fairly straightforward thing for you to do, to probably put some wattles in. And to the extent any digging needs to take place, we would need to know where material is going to be stockpiled. I think we'd also want to have identified on here where you would stockpile materials for the construction. It looks fairly self-evident, but we wouldn't want it stored in the wetland. Seems like you wouldn't want to do that here, but nonetheless, it's dot the I's and cross the T's.
Yeah. No, I mean, we have a fence along there, and then there's a fairly steep slope on the other side, so that, I mean, nothing's going to happen on the other side of that.
Understood. Yeah, it's a fairly typical request we make of folks, but self-evident here.
And like I said, it's relatively level, so I don't think that there should be much disruption anyway. It should be, I mean, they'll have to probably do a little bit just to make it perfectly level, but it shouldn't be much.
Yeah, I think they usually put down stone or something like that. So maybe a little scratching to put down a stone base.
Yeah, I think they usually just level it and then put some sand down. But
yeah.
Any other comments before we go to an informal straw poll on our opinions here? Andrew, maybe you want to run a straw poll here if we were to vote on this tonight, which way people would go?
Sure. So let's see. We'll start the straw poll with Brian.
I am comfortable with it.
Kyle?
I also am comfortable.
Chase?
I'm okay with it.
Carl?
Okay.
Michael?
Comfortable as well.
And myself, I'm comfortable. Everybody's comfortable.
So
Thank
Scott,
you.
what we'll have you do is work with your contractor, come up with the specifics, and then come on back really on whatever timeline it takes you.
great, thank you.
Very good. Thanks for coming. Okay. Back to the, oh no, I closed the agenda. Back to the administrative stuff. Amy, I think you also had something to add to that you wanted to add to the end of this.
Yeah, actually, and Dave Barr is here.
I thought Dave just missed us. He was just coming to say hi.
Yeah, right.
That too.
So I was alerted that there was a backhoe parked on the beach at his place over the weekend, which he can tell you about. So we went out there to take a look at it, and there were some issues to be addressed, which they have been in the process of addressing. I can give me a couple of minutes here. I can send it up, but Dave can give you a rundown on what happened out there.
Yeah, so we've been working on replacing stone walls after we rebuild our house, and we have a series of them, and one of them is at the back of the beach, which foundations had been put in for a couple years ago. You can see them on the middle of the picture there with the orange caps on top of the rebar that's sticking up. And since the water is so low, normally we would wait until and do it during the drawdown when we have more room to work. But since the water is so low right now, we thought this would be a good time to start it. And so what was being done on Friday was getting the foundation cleaned up so that we could work on it. And the contractor had some people in there with shovels getting the area cleaned up, and they were putting whatever they got with the shovels into the bucket of the tractor. So the tractor was to be there for an hour or two and then removed. And I realize I wasn't thinking of it at the time, but the tractor shouldn't have been there even for an hour or two, and that was a mistake. But the understanding was that he would be just there to collect the material that was shoveled out, and then it was going to be taken out. And I was gone at the end of the day on Friday. When I came back, it was still there and it had been left there. And so we moved it out on Monday morning. And our plan was, we're not going to start that work for a couple of weeks, and so we were going to put some. We had previously had silt fence and on the beach there when that work was being done, but we were going to put silt fence there again before we started work on it again. But when Amy and Tim came by yesterday, they suggested that we put the silt fence up now. So today we put in the second picture the silt fence along the beach with enough room for the contractor to do the work on the wall, and the silt fence is got a wattle in front of it, and it's all tucked in. And it runs the full length of that area, so that it's. I mean, we were planning to do that before the work was started, but we weren't going to be starting the work for a week or two. But it's put in there now.
And this section picture doesn't show it, but they had opened up the old erosion controls to get down to the beach. That has been reinforced and closed back up also, and extended this direction.
Yeah, and we put some more hay bales and wattles at the foreground of the first picture, because the hay bales that were there were kind of becoming old. And here's so another issue that we talked about when Amy came by yesterday was the under the cement mixer that they're using for their mortar. When they clean it out, it goes onto the ground and kind of spills down. I had talked to the contractor last week and said that that needed to change. The intent was always that the concrete that ended up on the ground would be removed, and last week we were talking about not putting it directly on the ground so that it runs like that, and so we last week we were talking about not having a containment like this, but kind of a shallow pit that would be lined, and we could remove the liner as we needed to clean it out. But we decided it would be better to not even make even a shallow pit in the ground, and just make a separate standing above ground containment. And so we put this in place today. And it's a wooden frame which is 4 foot by 6 foot by 1 foot high. It has landscape cloth across containing the bottom to keep anything from, so water can go through. And then it's got a 4-inch bed of sand on top of that, and then it also has another layer of landscape cloth on top of the sand. And now, instead of cleaning the cement mixer up on that terrace up there and having it kind of just run off from that, it'll be cleaned into this containment. And when the top layer of landscape cloth gets too covered with cement, it'll be removed and replaced with a new one. And when we get to the point where if the sand gets, the top too covered with sand to be affected with concrete residue, which hardens to be effective, it'll be skimmed and new sand will be put down, so that sand will be removed too. And then when the whole thing's done, that whole device will be removed. So that's going to be used now instead of having the cement mixer cleaned on the ground. And if you go to your third picture, Amy, you can see that today we also cleaned. So the third picture shows, I think, go back one. This is what it was, where the cement residue was on the ground. And then if you go to the next one, that's been cleaned up. It was always expected that it wouldn't remain there, but it's been cleaned up now, so that it's not so that you know that it will be cleaned up, because it has been.
And this wall also is slated to be rebuilt as well.
Yeah, that's one of the walls that was original that's being replaced. They were all in that kind of condition.
And so to be clear here, Amy, and make sure we understand it correctly, all of this work is permitted. We're just dealing with violations of the order of conditions, correct?
Yeah, some stuff just kind of got out of hand. I will say it was cleaned up pretty quickly. They called the operator down from New Hampshire to move the equipment and to get the erosion controls put in and put in that sort of settling basin thing and clean up the concrete. So the site is stable now. One odd thing about the project is the verbal and written description did talk about all three of these walls being replaced. The actual plan, said replace stone wall, but it just had a leader up here. So, and I'm sure in Dave's mind, it was clear, and I remember the discussions that all three walls are being replaced. It just didn't quite show up in the plans that way, which is what initially concerned me when I pulled out the file, because I just looked at the plan, and then I went back and looked through the minutes and everything and saw that it had all been discussed.
Right.
People think we get grumpy when we ask them to make detailed changes and stuff like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And frankly, I think the commission, everyone was so focused on the house and the 50-foot no disturb that it was acknowledged that the walls are being replaced, but the focus was on the house and alternatives for all that.
Right.
And then stabilizing the shoreline kind of from a little bit to the right of where I'm standing also.
Dave, has the contractor been provided the order of conditions?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, we've been working with him for almost 2 years, so I can.
Would you mind to refresh that?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'll give him another copy tomorrow.
I think you will find that there's a condition in the order of conditions that requires that it be provided to the contractor. So I'm sure you did.
Yeah. But like I said, it's been 2 years, so I'm sure I did, but I don't remember giving it to him because it's been 2 years. And I mean, it was, and I apologize for having it in there. I know that the order of conditions, when I went back and looked at it, said no equipment should be outside the perimeter of the work area with the siltation and such. And in addition, without approval, I guess. And then in addition, with no mention of approval, no such equipment should be left overnight, which wasn't the intent, and that was a mistake. And I probably should have called him back. Somebody was going to be there on Saturday to do work and would have been able to move it out, but then I'm still not sure why they didn't come on Saturday.
But Amy and Tim, you guys are comfortable with the site stability at this point in compliance with the conditions?
Yes, and they're actually, Dave, are they still thinking of putting the sort of landscape cloth against this slope here and getting that in place too? So it's a little bit of a bare slope here above the trench. So it needs
Right.
landscape cloth anyway, so they'll put that in place.
Yeah, so I mean, if that did erode a little bit, it would be caught by the silt fence and the wattle that's in place there now. But separately from that, we are going to be putting landscape cloth against that bank, which is to the left of the foundation that you see there. And just, I mean, as part of the construction, that would be done. It wouldn't necessarily be done now, but I have asked them to do it now so that the bank would be, any erosion from the bank would be contained at the foundation, at the point of the foundation, and wouldn't make it out as far as the silt fence, which would also stop anything if it did slough. But it's
And I did not see any sign of that bank eroding or sloughing, including after last night's rain.
yeah. I mean, it's the foundation was put in almost 2 years ago, so that bank has is pretty compact and stable at this point.
Okay. One last question. That silt fence, given the slope and the bare ground that it's on, it's particularly important that it's actually installed. Not everyone does them correctly. It's actually dug in stuff in place.
You're talking about this wall that or you're talking about
any of the silt fence. I mean, silt fence is supposed to be dug in.
So that's silt fence. Yeah,
This is put in very well.
It is put in well. Okay.
And went through the towing in and which side the wattle should be on. The middle fence, silt fence, is in a little rough shape. I told them not to bother replacing it now because I just want to see if the Conservation Commission had anything else to say. And then once they get going, they can fix this up certainly before it goes into the winter.
Yeah, I mean our intent at the moment is to when they come back tomorrow, this would get brought up to the same condition as the other one.
Okay. Sounds good. Any other comments from the commission?
I mean, just to mention that upper one that we're just looking at, it has basically been effective, but it would be more effective if it were, cleaned up a bit and made more, tuck the end in a bit more and kind of berm the wattle.
I will say right now, I think the site is stable. I was initially concerned about it, but I'll also say that Dave was on top of both things before I even got there, although they did get out of hand, as the equipment down there, which kind of got abandoned by the contractor, as well as he had already directed them to do something about the concrete washing before we even got there.
Yeah, we talked about that last week.
Dave, what's the schedule like for this? You mentioned it's already been going on for 2 years. Where are you at as far as progress goes?
Progress continues. The walls are, so the house has been done for a year. The only thing that's remaining is the hardscape, you would call it, outside. And there's some stairs going in that'll be done in the next month, I would say. There's some walkways, some stone walkways that are going in, which will be done by the end of the summer. The walls will hopefully be done by the end of next summer. I talked to Amy a couple months ago about the fact that we're coming up on the end of our 3-year, period for the permit, and there was mention about the COVID extension. And we, at that time, we said, let's wait until we get closer to there to see where we are. But I mean, I can tell you it's not, like I said, I'm expecting it will be done around the end of, next summer. So as I understand it, the COVID extension might cover that.
It's something like 400 days that you get extended, so.
Yeah, and we got our original approval sometime in the fall of 2019.
Yeah, we can certainly take that up when you get closer.
Okay, so I can talk to Amy about that. Okay.
Okay, Dave, I think we probably got to move on here unless there's anything particularly significant left, Amy.
All right, thank you very much. I apologize for that tractor being down there. That was not the intent, and I should have realized that it shouldn't have been there in the first place. It was only expected to be there for an hour or two, and it wasn't, but that wasn't right either.
Very good. Appreciate you taking care of it. So cool.
Yeah, okay. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, Amy, you want to flip back to the administrative discussion? It looks like we left off with an enforcement order for 17 more.
Right, so that was, I didn't write down the year, that was at least 3 years ago, I think. If, I don't know if anyone remembers it, this is the one where they built the tree house and nailed it up to the wetlands, the trees in the wetlands and all that stuff. So it's all gone. They restored everything. There had been a bunch of brush piles and lawn clippings and wood chips scattered in different places. That's all been cleaned up. They provided a final report. So I think it's ready to get the enforcement order closed out. Unless anybody wants to see it or ask any questions.
No. Get a motion to that effect then.
Motion to lift the enforcement order on 17 Moore Lane.
Second.
Ryan got it.
Roll call vote. Kyle.
Kyle Maxwell, aye.
Carl.
Carl Melberg, aye.
Brian.
Ryan Crowley, aye.
Chase.
Chase Gervig, aye.
Myself, aye. It's unanimous.
Thank you. National Grid Maintenance, they just give a notification. They'll be digging up Harvard Road in case you notice anything, but they are exempt for that part. The species management update, we had the Weed Warrior training and pull on Saturday with SBT, and Tim was there for hours. And the volunteers learned a lot, pulled a lot. So we might try to do that again. This is at Browns Woods. We might try to do that again, probably in September sometime, maybe. And I'm going to go.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to make sure Tim knows, one of the big reasons we very much wanted to bring him on board is to get help organizing things like that. I mean, the trust has been amazing and Amy's amazing, but there's only so many hours in the day. So we're hoping you can carry that mantle a little bit here and there and organize some of those things for us.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, invasive species removal is definitely something that I'm pretty passionate about, and would love to undertake.
Or Amy can lead those, and you can handle the administrative side of the house. I'll leave that up to her.
That works too.
Well, yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. And the library did order a weed wrench that you can check out from the library of things. And it's come in and we used it this weekend. So there are a lot of people very interested in the fact that the town has one that they can take out. And I'm going to follow up with Land Stewardship Inc. about a invasive species management plan for Cloverdale to see about moving that ahead. I think they estimated $1,500. And there's so much going on out there. I think having a plan is going to be huge. And that was it.
Okay. Anything else that anybody wants to cover here before we adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that one.
All right, roll call vote. Kyle,
Max Ulay.
Carl,
Come over, guy.
Brian,
Ryan Crowley, aye.
Michael,
Michael Livingston, aye.
Chase,
Chase Gervais, aye.
myself, I. It's unanimous. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Night.
Yeah, good night.
Good night, guys.